Aloha from Kauai. It's another beautiful afternoon here today. And recently I've been getting a lot of questions from people about which high histamine foods I avoided at the beginning. And I know there's a whole lot of different lists out there. Some of them are conflicting. It gets a little bit confusing, but today I wanted to share with you guys which high histamine foods I avoided at the very beginning. And this is gonna differ for every single person. You might not necessarily have to avoid every single one of these high histamine foods. Some of you might have to avoid all of them and even more. It's just a list that you can go off of to figure out what works for you and what doesn't. So, there's high histamine level foods, and then there's DAO blockers and histamine liberators. I'm not going to go into detail of which foods are um, which. It just gets a little bit confusing, and I don't think that information is very necessary. So I'm just going to go a list that I went off of at the very beginning, which are high histamine. So the big one was fermented foods, and that is very high histamine unless you make it with airlocks and it's an anaerobic fermentation. But any type of fermented food that you buy at the store is going to be high histamine. So anything like kombucha or sauerkraut, kimchi, and yogurt is another fermented food. It kind of depends on what type of bacteria is used to make the yogurt, but because it's difficult to tell the strains, sometimes I would just avoid yogurt all in all. So fermented foods is a big one that you want to avoid. Kefir you want to avoid as well. The next thing is pickled and canned foods. So that would include things like pickles and anything that's canned, any vegetables, beans, anything in a can. Basically, you want to avoid because the longer the food sits, the more histamine there's going to be. So that also goes for leftover foods. You don't want to eat any leftover foods because, like I was just saying, the longer it sits, the more histamine you're going to have. And ready meals as well. You want to avoid that as well. The same concept there. And the next one is mature cheeses. So you want to avoid all sorts of different aged cheeses and also aged meat. So anything lunch meat, salami, ham, any type of lunch meat you want to avoid. You also want to avoid bacon. Bacon is very high in histamine. And any type of smoked meat as well you want to avoid. So another one is cow's milk. This might differ for people. I did okay with it after a little while. At the very beginning, I did avoid cow's milk. So that's also on the high histamine list. And seafood and fish is also very high histamine unless it is super fresh. So it's very hard to tell when you buy frozen fish at the supermarket. So I'd probably avoid fish all in all and any type of seafood. And you also want to avoid beans and pulses. So anything in a can, and even if it's not in a can, avoid beans. Nuts, all nuts you want to avoid. And the next one is chocolate, and anything else that has cocoa in it, you want to avoid that as well. And we also want to avoid dried fruit. So any type of dried fruit, avoid vinegars. You want to avoid vinegars as well. Any balsamic vinaigrette, rice vinegar, any vinegar, apple cider vinegar. Avoid all vinegars. And citrus. So anything citrusy, any type of fruit that is citrusy, lemon, orange, and all that as well. But also things like strawberries, pineapple, anything that's very acidic is usually high in histamine. So avoid that as well. And when it comes to vegetables, you want to avoid eggplant, tomato. Some lists have peppers, green bell peppers on there too. I would just avoid all nightshades. And spinach you want to avoid. Avocados are high histamine. A couple other fruits would be papaya and banana. With fruits and veggies, the main thing is the longer, not the longer it sits, but the more it ripens, the more histamine it's going to have just in general. So you want things fresh and not that ripe, and you might be okay with it. So going on to our next is drinks. For drinks, you want to avoid all alcohol, and you want to avoid black tea, green tea, mate, any type of energy drinks you want to avoid, and juices, any citrus juices, orange juice, grapefruit juice, you want to avoid all those as well. And additives and preservatives, artificial coloring, avoid all of that as well. And another one is yeast in bread. You might want to avoid yeast. And the last one is wheat germ. So that was my list that I went off of. Oh, eggs. I forgot eggs. So you'll see different things on different lists. What worked for me was eating the egg yolks. Yolks were fine for me. I avoided the egg whites at the very beginning. Now I can eat the whole egg. But so you might want to experiment with that too and see how you do. My suggestion, or what I did at the very beginning, was basically I just found one grain that worked for me and one protein that worked for me and also one oil that worked for me, and there was quite a few vegetables that I could have and some fruit. So for me, the grain was rice and the oil was ghee and the protein was beef. So I did really well with local grass-fed beef, and I also did well with egg yolks. And I could eat a whole bunch of different vegetables. And for fruits, I mainly did apples and blueberries. And that was pretty much my diet for quite a few months. I just kept it really simple. Sea salt for seasoning, and that's what I ate. And with just avoiding the high histamine foods is not what healed me. It's just kind of what gave my body a break. And because of that, I was able to figure things out, and then I was able to add other supplements and probiotics, and that's mainly what healed me. But this is where I started, and so I just wanted to share that. And also, one more tip is when you don't know if a certain food has histamine in it, Google is great. Google is my best friend. So I go on Google and I just put the name of the food in there and put histamine level. And I believe that there was some sites that would show you exactly how much histamine is in that food. So try that out. If you don't know for sure, try Googling it, and usually it will show up. If not, when in doubt, I probably wouldn't eat it. But yeah, so those are my tips on the high histamine foods, and I hope that was helpful. We'll see you soon.